The story opened on a stormy night at the Demon Lord's castle. Lightning flashed dramatically. Perfect timing for the Demon Lord to call forth his 4 generals: Almandra, the Flame Bearer; Sylphid, the Storm Conjurer; Gnomi, the Barrier Knight, and a special soul from another realm who would supposedly serve as the guardian deity of water. Much to everyone's surprise, this special soul turned out to be just an ordinary salaryman from Japan. No one could figure out how he ended up there, least of all the salaryman himself, Uchimura. In his previous life, Uchimura was that typical fresh college graduate who spent sleepless nights hunting for jobs. When he finally landed one, he worked tirelessly without ever earning any praise from his boss. His superior, fed up with what he saw as a useless employee, shipped him overseas to manage a factory construction project on his own. Against all odds, Uchimura actually pulled it off. But no sooner had he succeeded than his boss sent him to another country for the same gig. Feeling disheartened, Uchimura found himself in the middle of the street, questioning his very existence. Right before a rogue scooter, Scootikun, as he'd later call it, slammed into him from behind. Next thing he knew, he was in a fantasy world, face to face with the final boss, the Demon Lord. Normally, someone summoned to a fantasy world would be greeted by a radiant goddess or a handful of holy priestesses, given a fancy sword and told to go save the realm. Not Uchimura. He found himself listening to the Demon Lord's villainous monologue. The Demon Lord radiated an aura of malice, but got straight to the point. He wanted Uchimura to join his demon army as one of the Big Four. On top of that, he gave Uchimura the prestigious job title of Overseas Expatriate. Confused, Uchimura wondered why anybody would choose a loser like him when so many more qualified people existed. That was when the Demon Lord started rattling off Uchimura's hidden achievements. It turned out he had done a thorough background check, learned how hardworking Uchimura truly was, and decided this salaryman needed a proper boss who would appreciate him. Uchimura admitted it was nice to finally get some recognition, but he wasn't exactly jumping for joy at the thought of becoming a demon general. Before Uchimura could politely refuse, the Demon Lord mentioned a few enticing perks: a steady salary, authority matching a director's position, the freedom to pick his own subordinates, and a personalized office. He also assured Uchimura that if he still wanted to say no, he wouldn't hurt him. He would simply send him back to his old world, where Uchimura was technically supposed to be dead anyway. In a twist of irony, the Demon Lord's decent employee benefits and respectful attitude made Uchimura realize something. He might never get a boss this considerate again. And so, against all common sense, he found himself seriously contemplating a future under the Demon Lord's management. Uchimura recalls his bleak life on Earth. Neglected by everyone around him, he had convinced himself he wasn't good enough. With that mindset, he advised the Demon Lord to retract his offer. But the Demon Lord had no time for self-pity and dismissed Uchimura's doubts, calling those who overlooked his hard work fools, unworthy of a dedicated worker like him. Rising dramatically from his throne, the Demon Lord delivered a final impassioned speech. He promised Uchimura that together they would unlock his true potential and reach unimaginable heights. It was the kind of pitch that could sell sand in a desert. Before Uchimura could respond, Almandra, the fiery redhead, cut in, voicing her disbelief. She outright declared that a pathetic human had no place serving the almighty Demon Lord. So, Sylphid and Genome, ever the loyal yes-men, quickly chimed in to back her up. To settle the dissent, the Demon Lord proposed a test of Uchimura's abilities. Almandra, who clearly didn't listen to the part about testing, decided to skip straight to vaporizing him. She unleashed an energy wave that knocked Uchimura out cold, though she seemed ready to do far worse. The Demon Lord intervened just in time, stopping Almandra and revealing that Uchimura was in fact a powerless human. This raised an obvious question: why recruit a nobody to lead a demon army? The Demon Lord explained that Uchimura's intelligence was precisely what the Big Four lacked, especially in comparison to the walking disaster trio standing before him. Before the Demon Lord could elaborate further, Uchimura regained consciousness, begging for his life. "Please don't let me die at the hands of this pretty young lady," he pleaded. The Demon Lord calmed him down, explaining that his value lay not in physical strength, but in his sharp mind. He clarified that the test would be one of intelligence, not brute force. The Demon Lord laid out his current problem. Negotiations with the surrounding races, like the salamanders and werewolves, were failing due to a lack of competent negotiators. To prove himself worthy of the Big Four, Uchimura was tasked with gaining the Minotaur's trust and bringing them into the fold. For context, the previous negotiator was none other than Almandra, whose diplomacy skills were questionable. If Uchimura had any questions, he was advised to consult her before leaving. Reluctantly teaming up with Almandra, Uchimura followed her through the dungeon toward Lord Tarius, the Minotaur chief. As they walked, Almandra, ever the aggressive redhead, taunted him for his slow pace, calling him an old lady. She doubted he had any chance of passing the test, while Uchimura, though scared, clung to the Demon Lord's words about ignoring negativity. Motivated by the idea of working for someone who actually appreciated him, Uchimura resolved to give it his all. When they arrived at the enormous doors to Lord Tarius's chamber, Uchimura hesitated, intimidated by their sheer size. Sensing his fear, Almandra suggested he open them himself, casually mentioning that Minotaurs were known for trampling people flat. Uchimura briefly reconsidered his career choices, but was interrupted as Almandra flung the doors open. Bright light poured through the opening, and Uchimura, suppressing his dread, steeled himself for the challenge. Inside stood a towering Minotaur, its presence alone enough to make him imagine being squashed into a decorative rug. After a moment of silent panic, Uchimura gathered his courage and offered to handle the negotiation. Almandra, unimpressed, stepped forward, claiming she'd show him how a pro does it. At first, her approach seemed promising. She started calm and composed, making Uchimura think she might actually succeed. Then, as if flipping a switch, she began screaming at Lord Tarius. Within seconds, the two were yelling at the top of their lungs, the negotiation devolving into a full-blown shouting match. Uchimura quickly realized that Almandra's negotiation skills were about as refined as a screaming toddler's tantrum. After what felt like an eternity of back-and-forth delinquents, Lord Tarius finally kicked them both out of his chamber. Almandra, desperate to save face, confidently informed Uchimura that the negotiations had started off well, until Lord Tarius just kept saying no. She insisted it wasn't her fault. The Minotaur chief was simply too stubborn to see reason. Rolling his eyes internally, Uchimura let her rant about how hard-headed Tarius was. When she declared she'd done all she could and left him to take over, Uchimura decided to retreat and regroup. The angry roars echoing from Tarius's chamber were enough to convince him to step back and plan. But the terrifying image of the hulking Minotaur kept haunting him, making it nearly impossible to focus. Could he even reason with such a towering mass of muscle? To clear his head, Uchimura wandered into a bar and ordered a drink. As he sipped, memories of his past life resurfaced, particularly the time when his clients had repeatedly rejected his pitches. Back then, he'd learned the importance of persistence and finding common ground. Encouraged by the memory, he downed his drink, resolved to give it another shot, and headed straight back to the Minotaur's chamber. Meanwhile, Almandra marched into the Demon Lord's throne room, eager to report Uchimura's inevitable failure. She argued that choosing him was a mistake, but the Demon Lord, unbothered, told her to wait and see. Frustrated, but unable to argue further, she rushed back to Tarius's chamber, only to find Uchimura standing outside, stuffing hay into a sack. "What's with the trash?" she asked, sneering. "It's not trash," Uchimura replied calmly. "It's my secret weapon for the negotiation." Almandra rolled her eyes and declared that negotiating with Lord Tarius was a lost cause. But Uchimura, surprisingly composed, explained that negotiations weren't about size or strength, but about bridging the cognitive gap between two parties. "The key is eye contact," he added with a smirk, clutching his sack of hay like it was a bag of gold. Ignoring her skepticism, he strode confidently into Tarius's chamber. For the first time, Almandra saw a different side of Uchimura, bold, determined, and far from the quivering wreck she'd met earlier. The next morning, she barged into Tarius's chamber, fully expecting to find Uchimura flattened like a welcome mat. Instead, she found the room in chaos, hay scattered everywhere. Assuming the worst, she groaned. "I knew this would happen." The Uchimura, looking annoyingly calm, informed her that Lord Tarius was already with the Demon Lord, finalizing their merger agreement. Her jaw hit the floor. How had he managed to pull this off in one night? Uchimura explained with a sly grin. Lord Terius was always open to negotiation. He just kept saying no to mess with you. He wanted to see how you'd handle rejection, but every time you stormed out, he figured you weren't serious. Moments later, Lord Terius himself approached them, apologizing to Almandra for his rudeness and thanking Uchimura for his tact. He extended his massive hand for a handshake, a gesture that nearly broke Uchimura's wrist but cemented his success. Having pulled off this incredible feat, Uchimura returned to the Demon Lord, who was all too happy to welcome him as an official member of the Big Four. The Demon Lord presented him with a golden bracelet, symbolizing his new role as the overseas expatriate of the Demon Army. Almandra, while grudgingly impressed, still made it clear she had doubts about his long-term abilities. But there was no time for doubts. More negotiations awaited. Uchimura and Almandra, now reluctantly teamed up, headed off to tackle the next challenge. Watching them depart, the Demon Lord smiled. He was confident that with their combined efforts, his army would soon reach unparalleled strength. And with that, episode 1 of our anime comes to a close. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more episodes of Uchimura's chaotic rise to greatness in this fantasy world. Hence, everything is constantly changing, never the same.